My name is Ray Condra, and I'm one of the 15 members currently serving on the Tennessee Arts Commission. And on behalf of the Commission and the staff of the Arts Commission, I would like to welcome each of you to Pickwick Landing and to our conference, Transforming Assets into Opportunities, Empowering Communities Through the Arts. Okay. Over the next 2 days, we will have an opportunity to explore how the arts can drive economic and community development. Of course, we all know how important the arts are to our own communities. But this conference will allow us to look at new possibilities and learn important new strategies that will benefit us all. I am so impressed, as I am sure you will be too, by the quality of the speakers and the important topics that will be addressed in each session. The Commission and the staff have worked hard to plan this conference, filled with usable information. And when we leave on Thursday, we can return home and put what we have learned to work in our own unique communities. It is great to see so many art leaders here today from across the state. So let's have a good time, share ideas, and enjoy our stay at Pickwick Landing. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ann Pope, and I'm Executive Director of the Tennessee Arts Commission, and on behalf of our staff and the Commission, it's my pleasure to welcome you to Pickwick Landing State Park for our conference. Pickwick State Park is a perfect example of what we're trying to do at this conference. Did you know that Pickwick Landing was a riverboat stop dating back to the 1840s? Well, did you? And during the Depression, the site was chosen as one of TVA's dams on the Tennessee River. What comprises the park today was once the living area for the TVA construction crews and family. The state of Tennessee purchased all 681 acres from TVA in 1969, and the state later expanded the park to 1,400 acres. The accommodations, which no doubt most of you will not be able to enjoy, because Shannon, who is in the back, it's his fault because he's way over scheduled us, is the restaurant in the inn, cabins, camping, a golf course, and a 2.8-mile trail around the park. You can fish, boat, or swim, and we hope that you can at least view this beautiful park from your window. I'd like to thank each and every speaker and attendee for traveling to Pickwick Landing. I know in many cases you've traveled very, very far. Okay, I'd like to just, if you wouldn't mind me taking a moment to thank our staff for putting this together. If y'all could stand or wave, Brenda, Michelle, Mike, Dennis, Alan, Rod, Vicki, William, Julie, Hal, Roby, Dana, Diane, Lee. Y'all back there? Wave. And I didn't mention Shannon because Shannon Ford, who's right there, stand up. He's the one that you'll see him pacing back and forth in a frozen grin, a smile on his face until the conference is over. Shannon has been in charge of this conference. You've done a great job. You've done a very good job so far. We'll see how it goes, Shannon. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
I don't know about y'all, but every time that I speak in public, I always get a little nervous. And so at times like this, it always reminds me of the man who goes into the psychiatrist's office and he says to the doctor, "Doctor, I need help. I am so confused. One day I think I'm a wigwam, and the next day I think I'm a teepee. Then I think, no, I'm a teepee, no, I'm a wigwam." And the doctor shakes his head and says, "You need to come in here and lie down on my couch." And he says, "I can't. I'm too tense." Come on. That's from my father, 35 years as Sunshine Chairman at the Kingsport Rotary. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I would like to say a few brief words about the purpose of this conference. We hear a lot today about how arts and culture can drive economic development. Whether you use the term of art, excuse the pun, whether one calls it creative placemaking or asset-based economic development, at this conference we're going to talk a lot about what this all means, and really by showing examples. You're going to hear the word asset used a great deal. Webster's dictionary defines asset as a useful and desirable thing or quality. What I think this strategy means is taking what you already have and maximizing its potential. And I believe few other states rival Tennessee in the diversity and quality of its landscapes, art, music, craft, traditions, and heritage, all assets that can be used and are being used to fuel economic and community development. We recognize at the Commission that we only play a supporting role in the arts and communities across the state. Our role is important. We have helped to strengthen Tennessee's nonprofit arts culture financially and artistically over the years. However, we never lose sight at the Commission that we are here in a support role to support you in the creativity, leadership, and ingenuity that you bring to your communities. We recognize that you are the change agents working in your cities and towns to ensure that arts and culture are in your communities. This conference gives us an opportunity to showcase innovative ideas that local communities both inside Tennessee and outside of Tennessee have used to transform their communities. For the next day and a half, you will hear how rural and urban communities alike are recognizing the arts as one of the best ways to drive economic prosperity. You will hear how the Tennessee Overhill Association and Central Park, North Carolina formed partnerships to inventory the cultural assets in their regions. How organizations like Selmer's Arts in McNairy County and the Crooked Road in Southwest Virginia have boosted civic pride and driven tourism by preserving local music heritage. Major partners behind creative placemaking initiatives in Chattanooga and Memphis, which both have received the NEA's Our Town funding, are here and will share how they built community support by using arts and design to connect and develop neighborhoods. Representatives from USDA, Americans for the Art, the Conservation Fund, and the Appalachian Regional Commission will discuss existing funding opportunities and innovative revenue strategies, while another session you will hear how the arts have developed workforce skills and better prepared students academically. Additionally, this conference will mark the launch of the Commission's next strategic plan, as well as an advocacy workshop focused on connecting the arts with local and state issues. In short, you will hear stories about how communities are using assets in culture and art to improve quality of life, boost creativity, foster a sense of identity and place, all while fueling economic growth in the process. Maybe Alex Haley said it best when he said, "Find the good and praise it." Our keynote speaker, Tom Borup, has been a leader and innovator in nonprofit, cultural, and community development for over 25 years. Based in Minneapolis and Miami Beach, that sounds like a good gig, Tom. Tom consults with foundations, nonprofits, and public agencies across the United States. His consulting, writing, and teaching explores intersections between culture, art, community building, civic engagement, urban design, town planning, and the active use of public space. And as many of you know, he wrote the book on building creative communities. It is called the Creative Community Builder's Handbook. Tom's book provides both a good theoretical base and practical step-by-step approach for harnessing the power of communities' creative assets. His book is used, well, I've got a whole list here, but basically by everybody across the U.S. So please help me give our keynote speaker, Tom Borup, a warm Tennessee welcome.
Thank you, Ann. Good morning. I had the pleasure of driving in from Nashville after dark last night, so I got to see a whole lot of lights along the side of the road and stripes on the road, but I'm looking forward to tomorrow in driving the other direction during the daylight. So I'll get to see it out of my windshield and out of my hotel room window. But it's great to be here in this lovely part of the country. The Tennessee Valley Authority and all it has meant and all its manifestations is something I learned about as a kid in high school. But I've never been to this place and to see a lot of it in reality. Did he turn that on? Is that going to? Thanks, Ann, for defining assets. I didn't really think about that. I just take it for granted. And I think it's a really important concept to begin with in this work that we do. And I'm going to show you a little bit today some of the ways that I do that and try to do that in my work. But I want to think upon the time we're in right now, and some of us we're glad to be here out away from TVs and radios and all the news about the election. After a while, it just gets to be, when's this going to be over? We have our different ways of wanting to see it come out, but in the end, it's like, just get this over with. And even this morning in the shower, I don't know how your hotel rooms have been. Mine's been great. Just one little thing. I was thinking in the shower this morning about this whole big political idea of trickle down, and and that's about all I was getting was a little bit of trickle down. So this isn't working for me. So I think what we're here to, and what many of us do, and what we're here to talk about is really more about trickle up, because we're working at the grassroots in our communities, and we're looking at how we can grow things, and grow our communities, and grow the livelihoods and the relationships that we have, and the capacity that we have to work together in our communities. So it's really more of a grassroots or a trickle up or whatever you want to call it. But there's three things I'm going to talk about. That remote control thing around here somewhere? And I can change the slide. Thank you so much. I need a little switch to turn it on. I'm going to talk about creativity. I think it's part of the core, the real root of what we do, and maybe we don't reflect on it as much as we should sometimes. Actually, I was talking to my colleague Marin Brown over breakfast, and talking about creativity and how I've come across a lot of research in creativity from all sorts of different fields, from psychology, of course, from business, from leadership, from organizational development. There's a lot of research and work and thinking and writing that's been done on creativity over the last 20, 30 years, but the one place that there isn't as much reflection about creativity, and there certainly isn't the kind of academic research and writing about it, is in the arts. I don't think we spend enough time actually thinking about what it means. How does it happen? Where does it come from? The second thing I'm going to talk about a little bit quickly is good places. If we're all about making our places better places, what is a good place? And how do some people think about and define good places? And do we reflect and think enough about what is a good place? What is our community? If we want it to be better, what does that mean? What does that look like? And then finally, and I'll kind of skim through it, but some of the ways that we can use creativity to create good places. I'll let you buy the book if you haven't, that Ann mentioned, if you want more in-depth on that. And hopefully you'll see the connections between these three areas of my presentation. But I think I'm going to do the speechifying thing of I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'll tell you, and then I'll tell you what I told you. But there's 2 points that I think are underlying of what I'm going to talk to you about. And they really are so fundamental, and they're about our success as a species on the planet, if you will. Two things are creativity, our nature to be creative and our capacities to be creative. And then secondly, our ability to work together, our ability to collaborate, to cooperate, to function as a human unit of communities. Those two things are so important, and those two things are things that we all in this field, in arts and culture, in our community work that we do, those are the things that we have a lot of skills and ability to make a difference. And I think they're really, really important. We don't always recognize how important they are. So I'm going to start this with thinking about creative places. How do we know it when we see it? Do we know creativity when we see it? It comes in so many different forms, in so many shapes and sizes. When I started learning about a dozen or so years ago about this whole idea of asset-based thinking and asset-based community development, and then I started applying what I was learning to the arts and culture work that I was doing, I also discovered that, well, the ability to see assets is an art form in itself. So while some of us don't claim to be artists, we do have a really important skill to practice, to always work to get better at, and that is seeing the assets around us. Seeing the assets in the people, in the places, in the connections and relationships, seeing the assets in so many different places. So I'm going to just run through a bunch of pictures, really, of from my travels around the U.S. and other parts of the world. And this was fun for me because I go through all my pictures because I love taking pictures wherever I go. And say, let me pull this one. So this is what I do for fun, is put together PowerPoints with pictures. So when we think about what makes a creative place and how do we know it when we see it, and these are some of the ingredients I think that are important, but there's more, and this is not exhaustive, but kids, young people, getting the chance to make music, make things, to just do what kids do, really. That's one of the things we see when we see a creative place. Another, I've seen people celebrating in the street on the left. That's in Coconut Grove, Florida. Every Sunday right after Christmas, they have this thing. It's called the King Mango Strut Parade. And it's really the people in the community getting together. It's pretty self-organized. It's been going on for almost 40 years. They act out street theater in the street, and it draws tens and tens of thousands of people to become a big event. And they pull on just stuff out of the news, really current stuff, and they act out street theater in the middle of the street down Growing. It's just so much fun. I just love it. I make an effort to try to get to it when I can. And then in Minneapolis on May Day, the annual May Day parade, also been going on almost 40 years. Hundreds of people get together and make these costumes and walk on stilts and do these amazing things for a May Day celebration. Places where people know how to grow things and make things, to turn the things that they grow into some really interesting and delicious products. This is in Boyne City, Michigan, a really creative place, a town of about 3,500 people, but been doing some amazing work, mostly around food and culinary arts, if you will. I worked in New Orleans last year, and boy, the culinary arts there, it's a big part of their agenda for their creative economy is the culinary arts, and as you can imagine, in New Orleans, but also in smaller rural communities too. This is also Boyne City, but they decorate up the street many times throughout the year, not just in the fall or around Halloween. This is a really creative place. I really love to see it. Is a creative place one that has these large institutions and schools and performing arts halls and museums and so on? Is that what makes a place creative? Could be. Other things people do with food. I was walking down the street in Brooklyn, New York, the picture on the left, and I saw a halal Chinese restaurant. And I just thought, wow, that's really kind of different. But then I thought, well, of course, but why not? And there's probably a kosher Chinese restaurant too around the corner. I don't know, but and then my friend Jamal on the right in Minneapolis, he's from Somalia. He came over as a refugee, a kid of like 11 years old, and he started a restaurant. It's called Safari Express, and he had, well, in my country there was one of the more exclusive kind of meats that people would eat would be camel meat. And he said, here I'm in America, and what people like are burgers. So he put the two together, and he's got a camel burger. Big hit, especially among teenage kids. They come on Saturdays, line up to get camel burgers. 2 years ago at the state fair in Minnesota, he had camel on a stick. And that was a big hit. The media loved that. You know, it's always like, what's on a stick this year at the state fair? So I just saw creativity there. It's like, wow. Detroit, where big old houses are, unfortunately, a dime a dozen. There's a whole neighborhood there, an artist named Tyree Guyton. It's called the Heidelberg Project, and it just decorates, makes these houses into art objects. Wow, it's some creativity going on there. And I was walking around a neighborhood in San Jose, California. I was doing some work out there a few years ago, and I had some time, and I was kind of doing an inventory of what's going on. And these small homes there, pretty packed together. These are, unlike Detroit, these are like $800,000 houses. I mean, it's one of the most expensive housing markets in the world. But what do people do? And these are just a few pictures, but I just saw people having unique fences and walls and shrubberies and a lot of creativity popping out all over. So if a place is creative, does it have to have cool cafes with cappuccinos with little decorations in them? You know, some people think, well, that's what we need to be a creative place. Maybe. I could certainly use one of those cappuccinos. Right now, I didn't get my usual triple espresso this morning, and I went on my little map, and it was 23 miles away I'd have to drive to get the closest espresso bar. And does a creative place, can you tell it's creative? They have bright lights and all sorts of like amazing things. In Seoul, South Korea, where I was last year, right about this time, actually right today, last year, the nightlife, the lighting, the urban spaces, they're lively. Las Vegas on the right, of course, it's, you know, full of lights and nightlife and activity. Is that a creative place? Is that creativity? You might find creativity tucked away in alleys or on the side of railroad cars, in fact. And the little picture down in the left corner is in Jyväskylä, Finland, where I was, I don't know, about 3 years ago. But this is a worldwide phenomenon. You see this kind of spray paint art. There's a whole lot of talent and creativity that's hidden away sometimes in some of this work. Creative, interesting architecture on the left, and whimsical public art on the right. This is also in Seoul, South Korea. Is that a creative place? Does that tell us it's creative? Do we need that to be creative? Traditional practices. On the right in Honolulu, the dragon dance tradition, very much alive. On the left, in Holyoke, Massachusetts, the Paso Fino horses. There's a huge Puerto Rican community that has clustered around Holyoke, Massachusetts, and organized itself, and they're bringing back a lot of the traditions from Puerto Rico, one of which is the Paso Fino horses. And great public spaces. Are those some of the things that we need to be a creative place? Do they help in creative places? Bath, England on the right, and in London, of course, on the left. Spectacular public spaces in which people gather and do things. And further, on the South Bank in London, just a non-stop parade of performative public art and public spaces. It's just amazing. Really odd, whimsical stuff, or the breakdancing kind of stuff that you might see in lots of places all over the world. And then I was in Tallinn, Estonia, the old town of Tallinn, Estonia. This is an amazing heritage site, a World Heritage Site now. A city that's pretty much the way it was 1,100 years ago. The Soviets really took care of the infrastructure. They put in new sewers and water and all that electricity and everything, which is no small feat in a more than 1,000-year-old city. And then the UNESCO and others restored much of the city to its the way it looked 1,000 years ago since the Soviets. But I was thinking, well, the gourmet monk down here, is this creativity? Is this keeping a place, a beautiful place the way it was for 1,000 years? Does that take creativity? Probably. The gourmet monk probably changed gender and packaging strategies here. But there's tradition still alive with creativity mixed in. So another question is, creativity require a place where people can work together, can come together and creatively solve problems? Is that an indication of a creative place? And here's another indication of a creative place. There are about 40 well-established artists, actually 40 small businesses that were kicked out of this building so it could be turned into luxury apartments. And these are a few of the artists who lined up. This is in St. Paul, Minnesota. So a lot of us see that as an indicator of a creative community. We're having artists pushed out of their spaces so that it can be upgraded for uses that are more productive in terms of economics. And this is a creative place, one where they project stars on the sidewalk. This is in Providence, Rhode Island. I was just there last week, and I did a similar presentation there, and I said, so just because you project stars on your sidewalk, does that make you a creative place? So what makes a creative place? All of these things, maybe? How do we know? How do we fine-tune our sensors so that we can look around and find the creativity that's around us all the time? And I just want to say a little about this idea of creativity. I have a couple of slides, maybe a little complicated. But there's a Stephen Johnson, who's an author, editor of Wired magazine. He's written a number of books, but one is called Where Good Ideas Come From, and I found it pretty interesting. Probably using it as a metaphor more so than really meaning it. He talks about we're creative because we're carbon-based life forms. That's kind of a stretch. But he says carbon atoms are really good connectors. They connect well with other kinds of atoms. And they thrive in a fluid environment, so in water, whereas silicon-based life forms dissolve in water. So carbon-based life forms have that sort of resilience and are able to float and move about. So I think it's more metaphorical, but he draws on that. He also talks about the adjacent possible, which is really kind of an important thing. If you think about Leonardo da Vinci drawing pictures of basically helicopters 500 years ago, nobody was quite ready for that. There wasn't the other technologies that were needed, and people weren't thinking that things like that were possible. He was amazingly creative, but nobody knew it, or at least that aspect of what he did. Now we see, looking back, that was something that was just way smart and creative. So the adjacent possible is really important, because if nobody around you, I know that each of us in this room have had a moment where we said, I just had the most brilliant idea, but nobody appreciates it. We've all had that, and what's happening around us has to be in sync in order for something to really be considered creative and for it to take hold. Serendipity is another, which means that stuff happens. Accidents. You do an experiment and it's not what you expected. And so serendipity is really important in creativity. And also he observed what he called simultaneity, which going back even way before the internet, way before jet airplanes, there were a lot of cases in which people in different remote parts of the world were having similar ideas at the same time. And it still happens today. I mean, I think this whole idea of asset-based work in the arts, of culture-led regeneration, which is most of what the European academic literature calls it, This has been going on all over or is going on all over the world right now. And I think it just kind of grew, people figuring stuff out around the same time. So this simultaneity is really important. Just a couple of more technical definitions of creativity, but a scholar in organizational behavior and others in environment and architecture really think about creativity as, well, first of all, both that it happens individually and in small groups. There's a lot of theory on creativity that it happens with people bouncing ideas off of each other, more so than just one person sitting alone in a room. And of course, in the corporate and the research environments, that's important. And also just this ability to solve problems and to come up with original and new, novel solutions to problems. Creativity does all of these things and more. But I'm going to talk about my theory of creativity for a minute. And I did some research looking at what makes a place creative, the same question. And I was doing a survey of, a global survey of academic research from different fields, and then pulling it all together and saying, okay, what are the common elements that all the people from all these different fields are thinking about in terms of what I call the creative milieu. How do you create a place, a community, a city, a work environment, a living room, whatever. It's a creative milieu. That's a place where people have what they need to exercise their creativity. And I found basically 10 things. The first was stimulating, and these are not in a kind of an order, a hierarchical order of any sort, but a stimulating built environment. That was something that many, many, many people across different fields said was important to foster creativity. Stimulating built environment. Inclusive leadership, meaning that the leadership, whatever it is, again, a business environment, a work environment, a town, city, neighborhood, involves people and engages people. So people feel included in the civic process or the organizational management process. They're part of it. So inclusive leadership is important. Openness and curiosity. I mean, that we are, first of all, we're not just shut down. We're willing to think differently. We're open to new ideas, to different ideas, even if they grate us the wrong way at first. Another really important ingredient. And available knowledge, basically the accumulation over time and that it's available like libraries or other, I mean now it's all electronic, but we have vast amounts of available knowledge. So we're always building on what's come before. We're not starting entirely fresh. And diversity of people and ideas, and this probably came up most as one of the ingredients for a creative place or creative milieu, that there's new ideas. I mean, you have to be open to them, but that they're coming from different places, different parts of the world, different cultures, different ways of thinking about things. If you're stuck in one set of ideas, of course, you're not going to have new ideas. And then a few other things, stability with an open future, and that means that people feel confident, whether it's a work environment or a community, city, neighborhood, that there's a sense of stability, that, okay, I'm going to be here tomorrow, and on and on, and I'm safe and secure enough, but yet not stuck. Yet there's possibility. There's still possibility. We have to believe in possibility. Paradox and risk-taking are embraced. And I've been working a lot the last few years, sort of the go-between between artists and arts organizations in the creative sector and cities, city governments, municipal agencies and departments and so on. And boy, this is one of the things that people in creative environments really, just almost by nature, but they need to be and generally are comfortable with ambiguity, with paradox. They're willing to take a certain amount of risk. When you take that sort of way of thinking and behavior and bring it into a municipal or city government environment, it's like, whoa, oil and water. That's the, no, we can't have any risk taking. We have to be clear. So it's really interesting and trying to navigate between those things. But in creativity, paradox, risk taking, ambiguity, those are things that need to be part of the mix. A reflective practice, I referred to this earlier, in terms of do we sit back and think from time to time about some of the things that, is this part of what we do on a regular basis? Do we go off once a month to sit and look out at the lake and ponder? Do we have some kind of built-in reflective practice in our work? The density of interaction, there has to be a certain amount, again, there's both, there have to be both, and so paradox, we're okay with paradox. There has to be reflective practice and there has to be density of interaction at the same time. So you have different ideas and you have a cacophony of things that stimulate you. And finally, space, this is again the paradox, both spaces for solitude and for interaction. So that's part of the stimulating environment, but that has to be present. So these are the things that I found, so I'm just sharing these with you, that enable people in a space, in a place, to be creative, to maximize their creative juices. And there's no guarantee that you put all these ingredients in a bowl and stir them up, you're going to get creativity. But we might think about the value of each of these things. So now I'm going to switch to the good, what makes a good place? And The Good City is a title from an author I'm going to share with you, but, and this again is Providence, Rhode Island, which you might recognize from Family Guy if you watch Family Guy. The idea of a good place or good city, what are some of the ingredients, what are some of the things we need to make that up? And this from Asha Amin, who's a British urban geographer, has written and thought for a long time about cities of all shapes and sizes and from different parts of history. And he boiled it down to what he calls his 4 R's to make a good place. And I found them really interesting, so I wanted to share. Repair, and that's, you have your basic infrastructure. You got to have roads and sewers and water and your kinds of stuff that you're maintaining that's part of one of the things that makes a good place. We take it for granted too much of the time, I think. Relatedness, that there's social connections between people. There's a sense of interdependence that we really need. I need my neighbor to do this or others to get things done. We really have, this is a collective activity here, making a city, so we have to work together. And then rights, that a city, whatever the governmental structure is, allows people to participate as well as to dissent. That they're engaged, this inclusive leadership idea, I think, that people are, they can be there. They have that sense of comfort in that they belong there. And then finally, this, I love his idea about re-enchantment, that a good city, a good place, it gives you re-enchantment. It captures your imagination, it stimulates you, it transforms you. And I think this is a big part of what many of you do, and it's as part of your contribution to the 4 R's here, but really important. So I think we need to recognize that's an essential ingredient of a good place. And then just to share, John Hawkes, who's an Australian thinker on cities and places, but he, I apologize for the washed out slide here, but he talks, we talk about the bottom line, and that's, that's usually the economic, and some people talk about a double bottom line, and that's often either environment or social, or we get the triple bottom line, that's economic, social, environment. Well, he quadruple bottom line sounds awkward, so he calls it 4 pillars of sustainability, adding the cultural, that there has to be a healthy culture among people in order for there to be a good place, a good, healthy community environment. And some of you may have seen the Knight Foundation, Gallup study that was done just a couple of years ago, and they looked at 26 cities around the U.S. Over a 3-year period of time. They repeated their surveys for 3 years in all of these 26 cities. And they were basically looking at what are the characteristics, what are the things about place that that attract people, residents, business, and that really holistically improve the quality of life and the economic vitality of place. This is Pittsburgh, looking out over Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which has worked really hard to be a good place. And the three things that kept coming out on top again and again in this Knight Gallup survey were, number one, social offerings, that there was stuff to do. People felt attached to their place. People wanted to bring their business here and so on. If there was, this kind of suggests some of the Richard Florida creative class stuff. You know, it's a cool, active environment. There's stuff to do. Social offerings, openness, that people felt welcomed. They felt connected to their neighbors, or if they were visiting or traveling. But there was a sense of openness, that you didn't have to live here for 3 generations in order to be part of the community. And I find that port cities and oftentimes, but not always, university or college towns, that's part of their DNA, is that openness, because they practice it all the time. And others who are not quite in that mixing all the time maybe don't have that openness, and some do. And finally, the aesthetics or beauty, that the place has to have good aesthetic quality, good design. These were kind of surprising to the folks who did this, that this is what created a good place and connection to place. And then I'm going to share with you my 6 principles of a good community. And I did this research and published an article in 2008 before I found the Asha work, which predates it. But I found 6 things in my travels and my work that make up a good and successful community. And city, it could be small town, neighborhood, so I called it community. The first is that the image and self-image of place, people in that place, are rooted in history and authenticity. You can't pretend to be something you're not. That you're proud of the place and who you are and where you are and what's gone on before. I mean, you may not always be proud of everything that's gone on before, but that you're in touch with it, that you're connected to it. I spent a lot of time walking around in Seoul, South Korea, and was so impressed with how the old and the new connected seamlessly, that you could walk from this little sort of crooked, narrow street, older part of the city, and walk right into this glass tower building without skipping a beat. I mean, it's seamless, and they don't waste an inch of space. It's just, and I think, you know, it's a more monocultural. 99-point-something% of the people who are there are Korean ethnically. So there's a long and deep history and sense of connection, but you can just feel it in the place, in the architecture, and how people move about in that space. A healthy and functional civic culture. Again, people have to work together. That there has to be dialogue, there has to be communication, negotiation, in order for a community to function. And communities that adapt to changing conditions. And many of you, if you've been to New York, you've seen some of what they've done there, and in San Francisco and some other cities are doing a lot of this as well. But they'll just take a lane of traffic out and paint it another color and put some pots of flowers or some benches or places to sit, and try it out. And if people take to it and it doesn't like totally mess up the traffic, then it's like, well, maybe we can make this permanent. So they're adapting. It's really interesting to see how New York is working so hard now, closing off Times Square to car traffic totally. They were having traffic congestion, so much traffic congestion in that area of the city, so the solution was close the street. And what happened was there was less traffic. It's just amazing. We always think we have to build more lanes or widen the roads or something, and they found the opposite was true. But every place is different. And so you try out what will work, what may work in your place. Integrating, this again I brought up with the creativity, but integrating new people and new ideas into a place. That process is constant and productive. And that's the challenge. And I think a lot of us in arts and culture can figure out ways to do that, to connect with people on a cultural level, to welcome and exchange ideas. On a cultural and intellectual level. connected to that, I think, is finding synergy across disciplines and sectors. If we're all siloed into our sectors or professions or departments and universities or whatever, and we don't cross over and connect and exchange ideas because we're so rigid, it's probably going to be it's a death knell to creativity. And this Helsinki, Finland, they have gone on a campaign to be creative, like few cities around the world. Maybe Singapore is more focused, but Helsinki, and this, I was there a couple of times in the last few years, and this place called the Cable Factory, this is where Nokia used to have its headquarters, the phone company, and they left to build, lots of big glass towers, and so it's called the Cable Factory, and it's full of creative sector businesses and artists and little think tank groups and small enterprises, software design, a couple of museums in it. They have space for conferences and workshops and performances. It's just a beehive of cross-sector, creative thinking. It's amazing. And there's a lot of these. I mean, Minneapolis has probably half a dozen similar, not this big necessarily, but similar kind of little beehives of cheap space, and all these little startup enterprises and artists just fill them up. Those are really important, I think, in our communities to allow this kind of cross-sector, cross-discipline work to happen. And finally, and this is like the repair from Amin, but investing in physical infrastructure, social and physical infrastructure. And I was in Munich, Germany, and this is a university neighborhood, and boy, and the subway system, and they maintain their infrastructure. I was having a conversation with one of my city council people in Minneapolis about potholes, because we were having the streets were just a wreck a couple winters ago. And I went to Munich, and it was this was the end of February, so there had been snow. There were still little bits here and there. I walked around for many, many hours, and I found one pothole in the whole city of Munich. And I took a picture of it, emailed it back to my city council. So this is the only pothole in Munich. So just to recap those, the six ideas, and the one, if you had to have one that's absolutely essential, a healthy and functional civic culture. Because without that, none of the other things are really going to happen anyway. So this is the work that I've done in various communities across the country, and people want to work hard, they have good ideas, they have great assets sometimes. Sometimes they have just amazing assets. But if they don't have the capacity to function together as a civic entity, or civic, social, private, public, whatever it is, if they can't work together. The Boyne City, Michigan I showed you earlier, boy, those people are smart and they can work together and get stuff done. I was just blown away. I won't show you pictures of communities where they're dysfunctional and they can't work together. So all the assets in the world won't get you anywhere unless you have that ingredient. So just in summary of this whole section, creativity is the name of the game, and the capacity of people to work together is an essential ingredient. And the connection to culture and unique identity of place is key to sustainability. I mean, I think for Tallinn, Estonia, for Seoul, South Korea, even I've done a little work in Boston. When there's a sense of connection to place and a sense of identity of place, that really is important for sustainability. Again, there's a good and really important balance between having a connection to history but not being locked in it, but understanding what role that history plays moving forward. So I wanted to share, earlier this year, the National Governors Association, you might want to look this up if you find it interesting, but they published a report called New Engines of Growth, 5 Roles for Arts, Culture, and Design. And looking at the sort of changing environment in the global economy, and how states are really looking for, okay, how do we support our growing industries and sectors, and arts and culture are among these growing sectors and industries, the whole creative sector. And how do they accelerate that and foster entrepreneurship and innovation and so on? And their 5 points. I won't read through them all. You can look at them. But really thinking about how the arts and culture sector, arts, culture, and design, can help in our economic growth of our states. We know we're fast growing. We know there's some great work by economist Ann Markison looking at how robust artist communities and creative communities are really important to establish industries, to help them learn to be more competitive and changing in a changing environment. Their marketing, how they think about their products. The arts community can really have an impact on that. We know we're critical for in this whole creative placemaking wave that we're experiencing, which is really fantastic. And we know we can catalyze revitalization, and we've known for a long time that we help prepare people for life and being part of the workforce and so on, to be creative workers. So it's great to have the National Governors Association kind of call this out and recognize this. It might be useful to some of you. So the last part here, and as I mentioned, there's a lot more. I'm not going to read the whole book to you today. I'm sure you're glad about. But I want to just skim over 8 different ways in which assets have been applied in communities to further both economic and social and civic and physical rejuvenation of those places. And you're going to, I hope and I assume you're going to hear a number of other stories, very specific stories throughout the conference about people who have done that and are doing that. So I'm not going to try to upstage them, but just to categorize these in some ways that I've seen happen. And the first is really about creating jobs, and the National Endowment for the Arts has done artworks and all this. We're really looking at not only our jobs in the creative sector itself, jobs, and important jobs, but we often can stimulate other nearby businesses and enterprise, identify certain assets, like my friend with the Camel Burger. He's got a thriving business and a big hit. He's been on like almost every sort of food channel thing and radio show. He loves being in the media. But finding a sort of culturally defined product or service that really has value and be able to leapfrog that forward. So we're creating jobs in many different ways, and that we think about how each of us has assets that can help make that happen. Secondly, understanding and enhancing the identity of place. We know we do this. This is really important. Again, I use a picture of Providence where they have the water fire, which is this phenomenal activity that's just brought so much attention. And really, I think it's really important to think both internally and externally, because something like water fire, people flock from all over. They read about it. They hear about it. Providence takes a few notches up in their brain in terms of its importance as a place, and an interesting place to maybe go sometime, and it is. But internally, what something like this does in terms of, it takes hundreds of volunteers to pull this off. So they're building a sort of, shadow civic networks. Shadow is kind of dark sounding, but really important kind of social infrastructure that's being built through the volunteer corps that make this happen. And all the people come out and they take part, and they get juiced up by it. So something like Waterfire, and there's lots of other things like this, festivals, when they're organized in a real grassroots fashion and use local assets, festivals can do this in so many ways. They're really, I think, undervalued sometimes. Because people think of festivals as like, oh, it happened one day and it was gone. It's like, well, there's a whole lot of machinery underneath the hood there that's making that thing run. And that's the machinery under the hood that's the important thing in the long term. Well, it's not, they're both important. So anyway, the understanding and enhancing our identity of place is really important. It was great to hear Ann talk a little bit about the history of place here. Everywhere I go, I like to learn a little bit about the history of this place, because that's often where some of the most important assets lie. And thirdly, again, I talked about the festivals, and this is just calling this out more, building capacity and social capital through engaging people in a collective experience. When you go out and you experience something together with other people, as we know, they're sharing something now that they take away with them. So if it's in the street, if it's in the theater, if it's in the gallery, it's wherever people are sharing a new kind of experience together. And it builds on these social networks. We know that arts and culture stimulate trade and tourism. But again, they build partnerships. You can't really have effective cultural tourism without having the assets and the relationships between those assets that are working together on the ground. Again, you can have some of the most stellar, attractive assets in the world. People want to come and see it, but if you don't have the infrastructure to welcome them, or the infrastructure or the personality as a community, to welcome them and to take care of their various needs and so on, it's not going to be productive in terms of trade and tourism. Attracting investment, again, we've seen in cities around the world how arts and culture attracts people, so it attracts investment. It makes places cool. They want to be there. It makes them interesting. It enables people to rethink places, think about them differently. So how can we remake this place? And this actually, again, I'm sorry to have so many Providence, Rhode Island shots here, and this picture was taken years ago. But the mill, and actually North Adams, Massachusetts, and even to some degree Holyoke, Massachusetts, there's old mill towns, and there's probably some in the South that I'm just not as familiar with. Old mill towns that have gone through big ups and downs and had some real downs, like Providence and North Adams, Massachusetts, have had this amazing resurgence because people found new ways to use this old assets. So these hulking old brick, empty, pigeon-filled eyesores that people were seeing, somebody else came along and said, this is an asset. Wow, what we can do here. And what's going on in places like that, these places are beehives now of all kinds of activity. Some of them are residential, some of them are, in fact, in Providence, they're weighing a zoning change to think about how to preserve workspace because they're seeing so many of these buildings turned into apartments and condos, and then they're afraid to become a bedroom community, and it's like, well, where do people work? So they're thinking about work-only or job-only zones in zoning to protect some of this as workspace. So it's interesting when the balance starts to tip like that, but they're thinking ahead. And also, I think I've put a footnote here about creating equity position for ownership for artists. If this particular building is not a condo building right now, but many like it are, and if artists kind of are just transient, I mean, we all know the gentrification phenomenon, and the artists come in and values go up, and then the artists have to leave because they can't afford to be there anymore. Finding ways to get artists into ownership positions and invested in their communities is really important, and then it keeps the creativity and their vital energy there in that place. So that's always an important consideration when a community is going through this kind of change. And diversifying the economy, we know that we become another leg of the stool, and we can help support other legs of the stool. So I think that's really important to think about ways that we do that and build connections across sectors. Next to last, enhancing value. This Paducah, Kentucky is where this picture is from, and many of us probably know that story about Paducah launched this artist relocation project, I don't know, about a dozen years ago, and some people thought, well, what? Artist relocation to Paducah, Kentucky? It's been incredibly successful and has really transformed it. It's a town of about 40,000 people. Lots of artists, lots of creative energy, lots of reuse of older buildings and spaces, especially residential within this one lower town residential neighborhood. Amazingly creative place, and it's made a big difference there. Not every community can have an artist relocation program. They happen to think of it and have the right conditions and get there first. So each of us has to think about what will work with the assets that we have and this adjacent possible and simultaneity and all of that. What will really work now and in this place at this time? And finally, and this oftentimes really is the first thing to think about because it's the least expensive and oftentimes the easiest thing to do, to create a buy local program. And there's some of the, Ann Markuson again and some other economists have done research on the retaining of wealth, and just a couple percentage points of keeping dollars in the community for things that are bought local, that are made local, or grown local, is really important. It makes a big difference, rather than that money going out of the community. So it's really, I think, very important to think about the different projects that we may do. I've counseled some communities who are thinking of having a big performing arts center and bringing in like Broadway touring shows and all that sort of stuff. It's like, well, then what you're doing is you're collecting everybody's money locally and you're putting it in a pool, and then you're giving it to the people from New York from the Broadway touring shows. So you're actually draining. I mean, I'm all in favor of having that kind of cultural activity in communities, but you have to think carefully. Are you in the end draining money from your community, send it somewhere else, or are you valuing your local assets and spending your money on those and keeping that money circulating in the community, because it makes a big difference. So those are my 8 ways, and I just wanted to share, as I wrap up, some work that the National Endowment for the Arts is doing right now, and they're looking at some indicators, and they've developed them and they're testing them now, and they haven't issued them yet, but looking at these 4 general areas, there's many subcategories, but just to share with you these 4 general areas about, are we having a positive effect on artists and arts community? That's often at the top of our list for those of us in this room, I assume. And then, is residents' attachment to the community, like the Knight Foundation work, are we impacting how people feel about their community and how they interact and how they connect and work together, and their attachment to community? Are we contributing to that? And thirdly, are we improving the quality of life for all residents? And this is a hard one, because what does quality of life mean? And they do have some things they're testing out there, but it is both economic as well as social and environmental. Maybe it's the 4 pillars there of sustainability. Are we improving the quality of life for everybody by what we're doing? Or are we improving it a lot for a few and not for most, or where? Where are we in that continuum? Really important to think about. And finally, local economic conditions. And there's been a lot of work, as you know, on measuring the economic impact of the arts. Some of it may need to be a little bit fine-tuned, so that we're looking at not just how much gross dollars are being spent, but where those dollars are going. We may have a situation where we're spending a whole lot, but the money is ending up somewhere else and we're not keeping it within the community. I had one experience with that back in the Boyne City, Michigan. I showed you a couple images of really creative, really smart folks. But one thing they missed, they have a great annual morel mushroom festival. It's one of the biggest in the world. So it's right before Mother's Day, I think. So they have great forests around there, national parks or state parks, and they bus people out. They have the whole town turns into a morel mushroom festival, and people come from all over. And the media comes, and so on. And I went to they have a little fair, trade fair kind of thing, and I went and I bought some of the products from the trade fair. And I look in the back, made in Kansas City, some of made in somewhere else, and I brought this to the meeting, and I said, you really should think about focusing as much as you can on supporting the locally made work, because they collect fees from the vendors, and that they thought they were doing a good job, but actually people were spending money and it was going somewhere else. So lots of different ways to look at our local economic conditions and how we're impacting them. But it all gets back to how we value our local assets. And are we really thinking about all the different ways that we can nurture those assets and support and highlight those assets and keep them as things that we really believe in. So just to wrap up, if we're really going to solve some of the great challenges that we have as communities and as a world, and make progress as a human species, I think the things that are really important are recognizing and valuing the creativity that's around us all the time in many different forms that it takes. Different people have their different ways of thinking about it, but trying to hone our skills as artists of seeing assets. And then secondly, as artists, as take that entrepreneurial part of how we think and what we do, and learn how to transform those assets into opportunities. And I know you'll see some great examples today of how people are doing that and have done that. But I think we're contributing so much to our world just by focusing our thinking in that kind of way. So thank you very much. I think there's ample time for questions, and there's a couple of microphones. So go around the room. Oh, you went to wireless. Sorry. Maybe, yeah, can the lights go up?
Yeah, we'll bring the lights up as well.
Great. Don't make the questions too hard, please.
Tom, would you expound a little bit more on how a community retains its historical aspects and values, at the same time embraces new changes, new ideas, new people coming into the community?
Oh, absolutely. And I think historic preservation projects have been some of the greatest transformers of communities. I've worked a lot in different states with Main Streets programs, which is a National Trust for Historic Preservation. Does Tennessee have a Main Streets program? Yes. You do? Tremendous program. In fact, last week I gave a keynote talk at the Wisconsin group of Main Street and downtown folks. I think we certainly want to value those historic assets, the architecture, the design, the buildings, and keep them. But what it takes to do that is to think of new ways to use those spaces in those buildings. They can't go back to necessarily to the general store, the hardware store, the druggist, whatever it was. That's just not going to work in our current climate and the way the cities and communities have been built out. So embracing new ideas about using space, and sometimes it takes infill, there's empty spaces and whatever, and what can be built, designed and built that's consistent with those, but has new touches to it. I didn't show any pictures of Glasgow, Scotland, but I was just fascinated in looking at, when I was in Glasgow a few years ago, at how they've done so much creative infill in between. And you could just see the historic work, the historic design and building materials and so on, and then you see a new building kind of squeezed in between a couple of old ones with some interesting references to new and old kinds of ideas and designs. The Miami Beach, I do spend some time and have a place to work in Miami Beach, and some of the art, and it's in the Art Deco district, and seeing the mixture of how people have built new things in between the old things that reflect the old, but also show the new. And Miami Beach is one of the most diverse places. That's one of the reasons I really love being there. There are people from all over the world who both live and work there and visit there as tourists. So I've seen places where new people have come in and been welcomed, and new things have been done with old buildings, but the buildings are still honored in that process. So I hope that, right behind you, or
I would like to applaud and call attention to your comment about imported art becoming the idol of the community. That is, the imported art in the large center is often perceived as the only art that exists, and that the only way to find art for the general public is to import it or to visit it in urban centers. And that's a syndrome that we in Crossville, Tennessee, which is definitely not a major urban center, have struggled with for generations.
Thank you. Yeah, and not to to make sure, I'm a Libra, so I have to keep the balance in the but both are important. I mean,
yeah.
You have, right?
Of course.
And you want to have, but not to put it on a pedestal so much and to diminish the local. You want them on equal footings. Yeah, go ahead.
An added complication of that is that the media tends to be focused exclusively or largely on imported or nationally prominent art in all fields. And it, especially with the demise of the printed newspaper, which we are experiencing, it is increasingly difficult to get the attention of the larger community through widely circulating media because of the national configuration of the media itself and the dominance of the nationally and externally or commercially funded art that visits and blankets the country, which is a good thing, but it tends to be a deterrent at times for the development of strong and stable creating institutions locally.
Right. Absolutely, thank you. And this balance between the creating and, oh, I need to talk a little closer in this one. Okay. that balance again between creating and consuming. A lot of the places that I work in, the cultural districts, or helping in terms of urban planning and neighborhoods, and look at what assets each place has, and some have more producing resources, artists and cheap space and so on, and they can make art. And then others have more consuming. They have old theater or spaces that are about consuming. You can consume amongst the artist galleries and or studios, and you can produce amongst the theater spaces. But you have to just understand which is which and how do you use them in the most productive way that is going to value the local creativity and local artists, while also being open to and appreciating the new and the different coming from somewhere else. So it's definitely in that balance, and oftentimes we're just out of balance. That's my mission in life, is to bring balance as the Libra. I don't know, but thank you.
I'm going to ask you to shift your focus just a moment to another angle of this issue. I'm sure that most of us consider that our cumulative audiences are the entire population in our locality. In reality, our core audiences are always a pocket population. And we're all finding it, of course, to be much more challenging to get public funds to support things that serve smaller populations. So share with us your insight about how we go about building long-term sustainable relationships with business entities that allow us to do this kind of community building and be sustainable, to achieve all of the things you've talked about, and yet to do that with a financial base that is also sustainable and long-term, but also married to a more corporate perspective.
Oh, I said no hard questions. That's a really complicated, a tough one, and I mean I maybe can give you a sliver of my understanding, but there's a big question for lots of people to think about.
But you've obviously seen an awful lot of examples of this working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think the key term in what you're just saying is relationships and long term, the two key terms really, because this stuff doesn't happen overnight, and we know that building connections within our communities between different groups, different ethnicities, different generations, is ongoing work. We're always building those relationships and furthering our understanding and connection, and trying to bring our business partners into those conversations in ways that they understand. And I talked about Ann Markison and the Economist and some of her research around how creativity in communities helps to spur growth and improvement and new product thinking and marketing and more resilience in the corporate environment. She was looking at the Twin Cities corporate environment in doing that work, where there's 21 Fortune 500 companies. 20 of those 21 are homegrown Fortune 500 companies. And this is a metro area of about 3.3 million people. So we've done a really good job at, I don't know how it happened, but we also have a very robust cultural community and also particularly robust artist community. And because she's done some other work in looking at I call it the migratory patterns of artists, and which communities have an inflow and an outflow of artists. And the Twin Cities has an outflow on the one hand, but it has a growing population on the other, so that means that more artists are homegrown there. So I think her work really helps us to see the synergy, and she tried to turn around the thinking about the prevailing thinking was we have a robust arts community because we have a strong corporate community. And she turned that around and said, we have a robust corporate community because we have a robust creative community. So I think, it's not necessarily one, it's one way or the other, but it's a synergy that's really important to help to point out to people that there's a relationship there. And I mean, I don't know any medium to larger corporate entity anywhere now that's not thinking about globalization and about attracting a workforce of creative thinkers and the kind of openness and receptivity to difference and different ideas, and not only that as a way to attract talent, but that as a way to create a more creative and productive work environment. There's some of the research I've come across from several people on creativity in the workplace, and looking at teams, because most workplaces use teams to do stuff, and the teams, the consistent findings are that teams that are put together that are more diverse versus teams where the people are kind of all more or less the same, culturally and gender-wise, age-wise, that sort of stuff. The diverse teams, they take longer to get going, but in the end, they produce way more creative products and creative ideas. The teams that are more similar, they get going real quick, but they don't do anything that's unique or special or innovative, or not nothing, but I mean much less so. So I think those are some perhaps important ways to help business partners think about some of the assets that we bring to the table for what they're doing. We're always going out and looking at ways we can get some of their assets. And I think in order to be effective at that in the long run, we have to look at what assets we have for them that we can exchange. So I hope that's one little sliver of what I can say. Oh, and I want to go back to the gentleman with the historic question about historic buildings and neighborhoods and so on. And it's probably because it's so close to me because it's where I live. I live in Minneapolis in an old 1927 Sears building. It's one of those big old monsters with the tower in the center. That was a catalog fulfillment center and warehouse and retail store and all that sort of stuff. 1.3 million square feet. It's a monstrous piece of property. And it sat empty for 10 years. In 1994 or 5, Sears finally closed everything. It sat empty for 10 years, and a lot of creative minds came together and figured out what to do with it. And it's got a 800 employee corporate headquarters in one part. It's got 94 condominiums in another part. It's got 280 rental units in the middle part. And it's the best part about it, and what's the big attraction, the glue that makes it all work, is a 60,000 square foot global marketplace. So what had been the first floor, big old 1927 Sears store, is a global market. And that's where I met my friend Jamal, the Somali entrepreneur who has the Somali restaurant. There are almost 100 mostly immigrant-run businesses that populate this 60,000 square foot global marketplace. Mostly food, but crafts and arts and clothing and stuff. Some of it's imported, some of it's made locally. It's just this amazing bazaar of international flavors. And it's saved this big old, huge old Sears building that's a major historic asset in the community. So it's where both of those things are happening together in the same space.
Tom put together the financing to do that, to make that happen. Was it the city or was it private entity?
Both. It was a big partnership effort between nonprofits. There's a nonprofit that developed and manages the global marketplace. There's a hospital company that has and they came in as a partner. So the city was a big player, a major developer, private developer. There's federal money. So, I mean, there was, all kinds of dollars patched together. It's a hugely complex process. I wasn't involved in the putting together of it all, but both public, private, everybody came together on the table and made that happen. Yeah.
I have a question. In your experience, I mean, I think you'll find this group very supportive of what, of the importance of arts and culture and finding the creative assets. I think that one of the things that we're grappling with is those perhaps outside of the arts arena, how to explain and measure the worth of arts and culture in communities. I'm curious about your work with communities, with states, perhaps with regions, to come up with return on investment types of information that we can help, either on a state level or on a community level to help build the case for arts and culture.
I'll get back to you when I figure that out. My work has mostly been anecdotal, and from my book, and I have 20 case studies in the book that I saw over the years and across the country, different ways that this played out and worked successfully. I don't do kind of economic research. There's other people who do that. So I think the Americans for the Arts work, looking at the National Governors Association work, there's some interesting and important tools, I think, to communicate. I think your point is really important about communicating across the sectors, because I talked about being in silos, and if we can't do the synergy across sectors, we're just stuck. We're not going to get anywhere. So it's a really, really important question, a really important thing to continue to work to do. I deal mostly in anecdotes, in observation, sort of what I suppose could be called empirical research, but not data-driven research. But I think, you know, it's there's some debate, but most people agree that stories often trump data. I think, again, being the Libra, you need both. But if you don't have good stories, you can have all the data and people's eyes will gloss over. So they have to, the data has to tell a story, and the story has to have data to back it up, I believe. But we really need the stories and these broader observations and a global perspective as much as we can achieve and put those together. So I hope that's helpful, but I don't have the you know, empirical data research to do that. I'm working right now in a 8,000 square mile watershed area in between Minnesota and Wisconsin that is looking at becoming a national heritage area and figuring out what's the overarching story or stories that binds the region together, and how can that be nationally significant, and how can that turn into a generator of both economic and social capital for the region. And they're starting to look ahead at how to tell that story when they get their designation as a heritage area and start to roll it out and see what's going to happen in the region. I think a lot of us are challenged by the data sources that are there. If any of you use the census data all the time, it's you know, it was designed for a specific purpose in a specific time, and it doesn't help us as much as we'd like. Same with the county business patterns that a lot of the researchers in creative economy work use, or Bureau of Labor Statistics. I mean, it doesn't capture most of the creative activity in the artists and smaller enterprises, or they're really hard to find. So we do have a struggle in front of us to be able to put that together.
Hi, a couple of quick comments. One of the things I found interesting about your conversation, we didn't spend a lot of time about talking about board members, recruiting, retaining creative and energetic board members who will be advocates and ambassadors to our work. Those really help sometimes in building those bridges between the artist community and the community of business leaders. One thing, Anne, I found just changing a word from donors to investors. When you're out there trying to raise money, people see an investment as a return, you know, inherently, and not as a donation or a charitable contribution, because we can demonstrate ROI through those stories. Right. But quickly, I spent 23 years as the managing director in a legitimate theater, and I'm now running a historic theater in Knoxville, Tennessee, the Historic Tennessee Theater, and it is that crazy balance between, you know, what we call legitimate and, you know, in homegrown art versus imported art. You know, we have board members and community members that want us to succeed not only fiscally, but as, you know, and physically and creatively. So I am really struggling with this, and I'm finding what you're saying is very interesting.
Thanks. I mean, we all do have our financial realities that we have to deal with. I think, though, one of the added challenges to, I agree we need to change our language. And, you know, we're here talking about assets, and 10 years ago there wouldn't be a room full of people in the arts talking about assets. They'd be like, what is this, a bankers convention? So I think we are adapting our language, and it's important to do. At the same time, I think we need to be thoughtful and cautious about it, because if you say return on investment, somebody in their brain, that means only one thing. But we're trying to talk about a broader spectrum of return, not just the financial bottom line, but we're trying to look at maybe those 4 pillars of sustainability, or some broader way of talking about return. And so not only change the words, but change the references in people's heads when we use those words. So that's the tougher part.
You can engage them with that first word, return, and then you sort of transfer the discussion
Yep.
to
Right.
adapting it to what we're selling versus, you know, widgets, for example.
Right. Right.
Lee Bear just told me to keep it short. I just know a lot of people in this room are from rural communities. And the question that kept popping up for me during your presentation was, what does a community that is not successful at all of these elements look like? And I realized that they're all around us. They're those small communities that are losing their young people to college towns who never come back home. These are communities that have high unemployment and drug problems because the industries or the small businesses that once sustained those very small communities have moved. And you may drive by a few of them tomorrow in the daylight. But I'm from West Tennessee, so I know there's a lot of stuff like that around here. And I think that one of the things that we've seen over the years that has really worked with small communities, Sean Pitts is here to talk about arts at McNary, and the Jackson Arts Council does a great job with this. I could think of a few other examples, but they just show up and they get to the table. They're not, as Bill Cleveland says, begging for money. They're getting off their knees and they're showing up as part of the community, not as an add-on or an afterthought. And I think that all of what you talk about in your book and in your presentation is so applicable to even these tiny little towns that may not even have a traffic light. And it's just at a smaller scale. It's more about not feeling like an outlier, but showing up at the table in economic development planning and community and future planning, strategic planning for the community, the 3-star program in the state of Tennessee and things like that. So I just wanted to bring it down and also ask your thoughts about more rural communities.
Well, thank you. And the way you're speaking and talking about a holistic view of a community is really important, and it's important for all of us to do. Many years ago when I was running an arts center and raising money for the arts center, it was a struggle. And when I finally learned how to talk to some of the philanthropists, both individuals and institutional, about some of these bigger concerns in our communities and how what we were doing could bring something added to the table to help with those, I started finding another zero on the end of the checks that I was getting. It made a huge difference to be able to step up in the community and talk that way and understand the community in that more profound way and bring the assets of arts and artists and creativity and culture to, and not to solve all problems. We can't solve all problems. We can recognize them, and we can look for the places where we do have something to contribute, or where we can find a partner who has a compatible way of thinking and doing things that we can work together with to solve some problem that we could never solve ourselves. So I think it's always looking for those opportunities, but you have to start with that holistic picture of your community, and not just here tunnel vision of like, I'm trying to promote art here. You are, but you're going to be more successful at it if you're embracing your community in a holistic kind of a way. So in terms of rural communities, big challenges, and I know I touched on some, but my reference points are more urban that I bring here. I think some of the ideas and principles, I think some of the basic creativity, how do you create a creative milieu, a creative place, is really important across all kinds of sizes of communities. And I also noticed out on the table there's a Richard Florida book called The Great Reset, which is not one of his more big, it's not like the creative class, but I find it more useful and agree with more of it than some of his other work. But this idea of the Great Reset, and I think it's important to understand that we're now well into, or at the beginning of, but into a period of major change in the patterns of how and where people live and spend their time and spend their money. And Richard Florida in that book goes back to several different, starting in the 1840s, but several different periods of time in history where our whole landscape has radically changed. And we know from the 1950s and the construction of interstate highways and all of that, and where people lived and the suburban growth, and it just radically changed the landscape. And now he says we're in another phase that's going to take another 20, 30, maybe 40 years, where people's living patterns are changing. They're concentrating back to urban centers, but also to small town centers, especially where there's some kind of public transit opportunity, railroad, like back in the old days when there was a railroad to small towns. So I would recommend that book, but it's part of the way of thinking about what are these patterns. And some communities are losing large numbers of people, especially young people, as you say. And in some cases, there's an opportunity to turn that around. I don't know if it's true in every place, or if there's just going to be a whole different living pattern that we're going to be experiencing in the next 20, 30 years. And our landscape is changing, and we want to and we need rural places, and I hope we'll always value rural places. We need cities, and I hope we will value those. But it's not one or the other, of course. But and what we can do in each to try to positively impact them, I think we have to look holistically, like you were doing.
Hi, I'm Alan Bell with South Arts. We're a 9-state regional arts organization based in Atlanta. And I just wanted to say I agree with you that, in terms of advocacy and making our case, we need both the data and the stories. And looking over the session for the various sessions for the rest of today and then all of tomorrow, it seems like there are a lot of sessions that are focused around communities, telling their stories of success, along the various themes in this conference. But tomorrow's last session, the last plenary session on advocacy, we will have at least a couple of presentations that will include some hard data. One from South Arts, a study we did called Creative Industries in the South, and we'll specifically be talking about numbers focused at the state level on Tennessee. And then I know Americans for the Arts has recently completed their Arts and Economic Prosperity study, and that will focus on at least a couple of different more localized areas in Tennessee. For those of you who are data hungry to balance out your diet of stories over the next couple of days, we'll have some data for you the last session on tomorrow. So thanks.
We've got time for one more question, so who has something of earth-shattering importance?
Put the pressure on.
It's you.
Yeah, no pressure, right?
Every question's a good question.
I'm a storyteller, so I appreciate the comments on storytelling and getting the grants and the advocacy and so forth, because it is that emotional appeal that eventually makes the difference as to whether or not people understand what it is that we're saying. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in knowing whether, as you visited all of these places, whether there was a trend in where the energy really crystallized. Obviously, there are grassroots movements where people just say, hey, we're going to do this. I just came back from the National Storytelling Festival, which was a completely grassroots thing and put Jonesboro on the map. But as you've looked worldwide, have you seen that it starts more with the city? Where's the catalyst? Where's the spark seeming to originate? Is there a trend at all, or does it just happen wherever that spark falls?
I think it happens in any of those places. It's the simultaneity stuff, that people are having like great ideas around the world at the same time. But I'm a big fan of storytelling, and I try to employ it as much as possible in a lot of the planning work that I do, especially in city planning, urban planning, because I like to get the traditional city planners to think a little differently. But stories are really the glue, and a city plan is basically a story that's told, and it's told where's this place going. But I recently did a project in which we started with the stories of place, and I actually had some money to have a youth video group go out and interview 30 people, and we kind of identified, we need a bus driver and a policeman and a homeless teenager and this and that for these 30 stories of place, so we could understand this place better. And I think as a result, we looked into history and we tried to understand the place as the beginning for a creative placemaking and city planning project. So it's the place to start. I'm a big fan of engaging storytellers and storytelling, and engaging everybody in storytelling as much as possible about a place. But where does the spark happen? Geez, that would be that would be the magic ingredient if I knew how that happened. But I think it probably is, whether it's in a rural place or an urban place, it's in people exchanging stories, where one of them or all of them at the same time kind of go, oh. I remember with the Boyne City, Michigan, which is way up in northwestern Michigan, not quite on Lake Michigan, but on a little lake that's off Lake Michigan. Beautiful, but a really beautiful little place. There was a point at which we all, I think together around a table, a planning group there, started thinking about the assets in the place. And there were farmers and people, and even people doing, like in the fall, they do a corn maze, or they do pumpkin carving contests. Or there were several really good restaurants in this little town. It was really remarkable. And there were a lot of artists, people who were writers and visual artists. And there was a point at which, and I think it was probably the librarian in town, who he suddenly came out with this idea, because it's Boyne City, and he said, Boyne Appetit. Because they had all these food, the Morel Mushroom Festival and all that sort of stuff. And so at that moment, just that word, Boyne Appetit, somehow connected things for people. And from then on, we really understood that food and creative ways of thinking about food was the central asset that this community had, both for tourism, and because there's a ski mountain about 10 miles down the road, so there's a potential for some tourism, and people have lake homes and so on. But a lot of people live there and have businesses and are entrepreneurs there. But that became the coalescing moment around food, and then they began to build out from there how they could revitalize the economy and the social structure of the community through food. So those sparks, I've been in the room when they've when they've happened, but it can be big city, small town, or a little neighborhood somewhere. But I love it when that happens.
Why don't we give our keynote speaker, Tom Borup, a big hand.